for 515 Fantasy Football.
I know football. Are you ready for some football?
Domination on Sundays begins with listening to these guys on Thursdays.
You ready for this?
Over 40 years of fantasy football experience between them.
Yeah!
One is a proud veteran of the United States Marine Corps, husband and father, entering his 18th year of fantasy competition. Brian Eikenberry. The other, also a proud husband and father, is one of the winningest fantasy minds in the state. Celebrating 24 years of excellence. Andy Hall.
Let's get the game on!
It's showtime. The 515 Fantasy Football Show with your hosts, Andy Hall and Brian Eikenberry.
Welcome, friends. Great to have you back following a brutal week 2 of NFL action. Injuries are inevitable in the fantasy game. What separates the men from the boys, though, are the adjustments you make to your team throughout the course of a season. We're here to make sure you're grabbing the right guys to guide you to that fantasy championship. Andy Hall, flying solo, at least for the time being. Brian Eikenberry will be joining me for the matchups here coming up very soon. Week 2 was the perfect example of why I like to load up on every position except running backs early in drafts. Doing the opposite pays dividends when the inevitable happens. And once again here in 2016, we have a really tough week of injuries where we lost a lot of players, and we'll get to those in the headlines of Fantasy Note here shortly. But first, we invite you to be a part of our online community at Facebook, 515 Fantasy Football, on Twitter at 515 Fantasy, and online at espndemoines.com. Content always provided, always updated up at that website. The help desk was something I had up earlier this week in case you needed to pick somebody up at the quarterback, running back, receiver, or tight end positions. And, of course, we're all about interacting with you, unlike some of the experts that are out there that I'm sure you follow on social media and elsewhere. They barely ever respond to you. Why? I don't know. Maybe they're too busy. Maybe they're too cool. We're not either of those. Brian and I would love to interact with you. So if you want to hit us up individually, we are on Twitter at Andy Hall Radio, at Ike FFB. That's IKEFFB. Remember our guarantee, we will never ignore you. You invest in us, we give it right back to you. A ton of things to cover over this 2-hour show. We've got grades on all the fantasy relevant players, break down each of this week's matchups. If you're desperate, another round of bargain bin, pop quiz happening again this week, and the Flea Flicker going to wrap things up. But since we have an expanded version of the headlines, we're going to begin there. The Vikings' Adrian Peterson suffered a torn meniscus in his right knee Sunday night. Surgery is expected. He will miss several months. That leaves Jerick McKinnon and Matt Asiata in a timeshare going forward. According to head coach Mike Zimmer, 65-35 split. But depending on what kind of league you're in, it'd be an interesting pickup. If you're in a PPR league, I think you definitely like McKinnon better than Asiata. If you're in a standard league, I think you can get Asiata on the cheap and actually get better production out of him. Just my 2 cents. Moving on, the Boston Herald's Jeff Howe reports Patriots quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo has a sprained AC joint in his shoulder. With 2 weeks before Tom Brady's return, rookie Jacoby Brissett is likely to start this week and going forward. Chargers running back Danny Woodhead has a torn ACL. He's out for the season. Melvin Gordon in line for an expanded role. Former Chief Dexter McCluster expected to contribute as well. Browns quarterback Josh McCown suffered a shoulder injury. Cody Kessler is the backup. He'll start week 3 for Cleveland. No IR for McCown. He'll likely return later in the season. We will get an extended look, though, at Kessler. Charlie Whitehurst was signed on Monday by the Browns, probably just a depth signing there more than anything else. Dolphins running back Arian Foster day-to-day with a groin injury. Jay Ajayi is the main backup. Dolphins are cautiously optimistic about his chances of playing this week. Ajayi is terrible, though. I don't know if I'd go there. You might take a look at Kenyon Drake. He is the backup to Ajayi. Carolina Panthers running back Jonathan Stewart will be out at least a week or two with a hamstring. Fozzie Whitaker and Cameron Artis-Payne will both contribute in a committee approach while he's out, and that is according to Carolina coaching staff, which have lied to us before, so take everything you hear with a grain of salt when it comes to coaching staffs. Bucs running back Doug Martin forced from Sunday's game with a hamstring injury. He's expected to miss at least 3 weeks. Good news for Charles Sims owners. Here's your opportunity to plug him into your lineup. He will get the bulk of the work. Unfortunately, if you look a little deeper and see what kind of matchups he's got coming up in the next few weeks, not exactly the most favorable. But he is a starting back in the NFL. If you could use one of those in your starting lineup, get him in there. Colts wide receiver Dante Moncrief expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks with a fractured scapula, according to head coach Chuck Pagano. Devin Street was signed off the Patriots practice squad. I don't expect him to be any more than just a depth guy, but really who you want to be taking a look at here is Philip Dorsett, although I'm not sold he's going to have the biggest week this week, and I'll tell you why when we get to that matchup. Seahawks running back Thomas Rawls suffered a leg contusion on Sunday. Christine Michael going to get yet another opportunity to claim that backfield. My worry, as always, with Seattle is that offensive line. It is awful. Wide receiver Doug Baldwin had an MRI done on his knee Monday. It did come back negative. He might miss some time, but it doesn't look like it's going to be an extended amount of time, which is great news. I do, however, want to make sure you're keeping an eye on guys like Jermaine Kearse and Paul Richardson, both of which should be in line for more targets, seeing as Tyler Lockett is also on the mend. Jets wide receiver Brandon Marshall has a knee sprain. So after, I don't know if you saw that tackle, he was brought down by his face mask inside the 5-yard line, and his leg buckled very awkwardly. It almost looked like it could be a pretty serious knee injury. Turns out just to be a knee sprain. He is expected to play here in week 3. I would keep a very close eye on the actives and inactives on Sunday, however, because that might not be 100%. Eric Decker dealing with some shoulder pain. Eric Decker's a tough guy. Have a feeling he's going to play right through that. Lions running back Amir Abdullah has been placed on IR with a foot injury. Head coach Jim Caldwell confirmed an expanded role ahead for rookie Dwayne Washington. And also Brian's boy Joique Bell, former Lion, free agent, worked out for the team earlier this week. So here's what I'm expecting out of the Lions backfield. Dwayne Washington was already the goal line specialist. Joique Bell, if they bring him in, he already knows the playbook. So, I mean, they could theoretically plug him in and play and take some carries away from Theo Riddick. Now, Theo Riddick's not typically a guy you would think of as a workhorse back, but he might get a decent amount more work as far as carries out of the backfield than he normally would. He certainly is a great PPR play as he gets lots of targets out of the Lions backfield. Bears quarterback Jay Cutler out with a thumb sprain. He's expected to miss 2 to 3 weeks, and Brian Hoyer is the starting quarterback in Chicago in his place. Broncos tight end Virgil Green exited the stadium following Sunday's win with a walking boot on his left leg. Not sure I would go any deeper than Virgil Green as far as tight ends go in that Broncos offense, and that's unfortunate because that's a very tight end-friendly offense. Cowboys quarterback Tony Romo had a really good examination in week 2, according to Jerry Jones. Doesn't tell me a whole lot other than he's healing well, I guess, and might be back actually sooner than most people thought initially. Talking like sometime here in the next 4 to 5 weeks maybe. Raiders head coach Jack Del Rio confirmed the team will continue to use a backfield rotation in Oakland. That means Latavius Murray, that means DeAndre Washington, and that means Jalen Richard. All 3 of them will get carries. Of course, I'm not expecting a ton to be taken away from Latavius Murray, the starter. So if you've been plugging in Latavius Murray, I wouldn't worry too much about this, but just know that the same thing that has been happening thus far this season through 2 games is going to continue to happen as backs rotate there in Oakland. Bengals tight end Tyler Iford returned to practice this week on a limited basis. Listen to me. If Tyler Iford happens to be sitting on your waiver wire, and in one of my leagues, he actually was, and I can't wait to mention it to Brian because it happens to be one of the leagues he and I share and compete together in. I grabbed Tyler Iford. I couldn't believe he was still available. Now is a sneaky good time if he's available on a waiver wire to grab Tyler Iford. You knew coming into this season that the guy was going to miss 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks. It's looking now on a limited basis like he's back at practice, which means game time might be just around the corner. And Tyler Iford, after the season he had last year, no question you'll want to have him on your fantasy squad. Also back to practice this week on a limited basis, Jags running back Chris Ivory. Nobody has any clue as to what this mystery illness/injury was that had him hospitalized the first couple of weeks of the season. But I will say this. We've seen what TJ Yeldon can do out of that Jacksonville backfield, and it's not good. He was sub 2 yards per carry in the first game, equally as bad in game number 2. Chris Ivory, if and when he does return to the lineup, could be in line for a pretty sizable role. Finally, one more note here. Free agent running back C.J. Spiller met with the Packers earlier this week. Oop, there's one that just popped up too. Ronnie Hillman, free agent running back, signed by the Vikings. A little depth there at the running back position. I don't think that changes much in terms of McKinnon's value nor Asiata's. Stick around. We're going to get right into the matchups coming up here in just a bit. Brian and I will break them down for you. 515 Fantasy Football Show. You're hearing it on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. You are listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Show. No matter how you found us, on iTunes, on Stitcher, online at espndesmoines.com, or on the radio at 1350 AM ESPN Radio, we can't thank you enough for checking our show out, and we hope that the upcoming segments with the breakdowns of all the matchups and fantasy-relevant players will help contribute to another fantasy victory for you this week. Speaking of which, my matchups begin with the Thursday night matchup tonight. Houston at New England. On the Texans side, Brock Osweiler gets a B-. He faced the Patriots as a member of the Broncos last season, threw for 270 yards, a touchdown, and an INT. He has comparable weapons as a Texan, but this time he's playing in Foxborough. The Patriots are giving up a lot of yards through the air thus far in 2016, but have only surrendered 4 passing touchdowns, 2 of those to Ryan Tannehill last week at Gillette Stadium. Lamar Miller is a B-. He's faced New England 7 times since 2012, only scored 2 touchdowns in that span, 1 on the ground, 1 via the air. He's never surpassed 89 yards rushing, nor has he piled up more than 23 yards receiving in any one game. The Patriots have been relatively stout against the run, a trend that dates back to 2015 when they ranked in the top 10 against opposing backs. And if you know anything about Bill Belichick, he likes to take away a team's number 1 threat. That could very well be Lamar Miller, so they're game planning perhaps for him. DeAndre Hopkins, I give a B to. Been held in check in 2 games against New England, averaging about 65 yards receiving per game, both of those games in Houston. He'll see volume here, but he may be held in check on the road. Will Fuller also gets a B, just the second receiver to post consecutive 100-yard games in each of his first 2 games. Fuller looks like the real deal early on. Osweiler has targeted him 18 times total thus far through 2 weeks. Tight end C.J. Fedorowicz, I'm going to give a barely starting grade of a C. A complete dart throw here, but it is worth noting the Patriots' pass defense has been soft in the middle, where Fedorowicz might be operating like Larry Fitzgerald did back in Week 1 and Jordan Cameron did in Week 2, and we all know how both of those guys ended up performing very well. Over to the Patriots side, Jacoby Brissett will be your starting quarterback. I'm going to leave him on the bench. It could be argued the system the Patriots have in place benefits a young and unproven quarterback like Brissett, but I'm not taking my chances against a tough Texans defense that could have him scrambling. To the running game, LeGarrette Blount, a B-. His strength is as a ground and pound guy. He'll need to do plenty of that to succeed against a tough Texans front 7. Kevin White, I'm going to give a C+ to. He should see more action this week, assuming this game is competitive, which it should be. Remember, if the Patriots are up big, Blount gets the volume, and a lot of it. If it's close or if New England does fall behind, White should benefit, and that could be one of those games here. To the receivers, Julian Ellerman, a B, hasn't faced the Texans since 2013, but has posted good numbers against them historically, going over 100 yards receiving in 2 games on the road in Houston. Danny Amendola, I'll give a B- to. He could see more targets than any other Patriots pass catcher, depending on Gronk's status for Week 3. Speaking of Gronk, an easy A grade, assuming he plays. I'm not hesitating to plug him in, even though it would be his first action of the season. In 2 previous matchups against these Texans, Gronk has scored and posted at least 87 yards receiving.
My first matchup of the day are the Cardinals at the Fancy Pants Buffalo Bills. Quarterback Carson Palmer, he's going to get the A for obvious reasons, mainly because he is one of a handful of QBs where his offensive weapons are actually all healthy. So this is a good thing if you're a Carson Palmer. You don't have to worry about the injury bug quite yet. Running back David Johnson, he's going to get the B+. He is playing well. He's obviously getting a ton of action. There is a reason I didn't give him the A, and that's because all of the other targets that they're going to have all day through the air. So I couldn't quite give the former UNI alum the A here, but he's going to get that B+. Wide receiver Larry Fitzgerald, he has proven for 2 weeks straight that he is a fantasy football point machine, outscoring nearly every single wide receiver in the NFL. Through 2 games, he has 162 yards and 3 touchdowns. For that reason, and that reason alone, Larry Fitzgerald is giving an A. And mind you, that a lot of people were taking Larry Fitzgerald late. He was typically not the first Cardinals wide receiver off the board. Wide receiver Michael Floyd typically was taken over Fitz, so Larry Fitzgerald's going to get that A. Michael Floyd, B-. Stats do not lie. Floyd has 69 yards and 1 touchdown. So yes, Michael Floyd, B-. John Brown, C+. Darren Fells, he's going to get a C. I wouldn't even bother with either of those two guys just because David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald, they're really carrying that offense there. Quarterback Tyrod Taylor, he's going to get a B. His weapons are hurting. He's still able to move, but given the new offensive coordinator situation that they've just talked about, they have said he is looking to throw the ball more. Is that a lack of confidence in LaShawn McCoy? Speaking of, B- for LaShawn McCoy. He is averaging just about 60 yards per game. He's also catching some passes, but Buffalo is really that bottom feeder offense this year. And you know what? With Sammy Watkins still hobbled up, he's going to get a B- himself. He is playing through that pain. It definitely does affect his play, so it should affect your fantasy football roster. So I personally have drafted him. I'm leaving him out of my lineup, so I'm not putting a lot of faith in Sammy Watkins right now. Wide receiver Robert Woods, on the other hand, is getting a B. I would look for Woods to pick up the slack here. Also, Greg Salas, he's going to pick it up a little bit. He has 89 yards and a touchdown. So Robert Woods, B. Greg Salas is going to get a C. Tight end Charles Clay, I was hoping last week was going to be his big boost, but maybe it's going to be this week. So I'm going to give Charles Clay a C just because I'm not quite sure if he's there yet.
Oakland at Tennessee. On the Raiders side, Derek Carr's an A grade. 24 for 37, 330 yards and 3 touchdowns last season when these two teams met. Should be seriously considered this week. Latavius Murray, a C+. I'm not in love with this matchup for the Raiders running game in general. Murray didn't see much daylight in last year's game between these two teams, and I don't see it much here either. Amari Cooper, a B+. Again, if history is any indication, Cooper should be in line for a nice day here via the air. Michael Crabtree, a B. I like him almost as much as I do Cooper in a game that should feature lots of fireworks in the passing game. Clive Walford, a C, was virtually non-existent in the 2015 matchup. Gaining traction, though, as a sleeper at the tight end position. Not quite there yet for your starting lineup, at least not in my opinion. On the Titans side, Marcus Mariota is a B+. He would be an A grade if I didn't think the Raiders would get a healthy dose of DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry in addition to a ton of passing from Mariota. Oakland is currently the most beatable of all NFL defenses through the air, and they rank near the bottom in all of 2015. DeMarco Murray is a B+ in this one. Faced the Raiders in 2013 as a member of the Cowboys. Had over 100 combo yards and 3 touchdowns. But the talented rookie he's splitting time with should cut into that potential. Start with confidence, but expect kind of a 60-40 timeshare here. Derrick Henry's a B grade. I love him as a sneaky flex play this week. The Raiders won't be able to handle him. Tajay Sharp, a B. He played all 67 snaps in the Titans Week 2 game. Clear-cut number 1 wide receiver option in Tennessee. Will be up and down statistically like most rookies, but in good matchups such as this, tough to sit him on the bench. Andre Johnson, I'll give him a C+. Kind of a big fan of him down in the red zone. Mariota does trust him. Rashard Matthews, though, a C. Kind of a meh play. I thought there was more there than there actually is. Delaney Walker, I'll give him an A grade. Can't be denied facing last year's 32nd ranked defense against opposing tight ends.
All right, on to the Redskins at the New York Giants. Kirk Cousins, he's going to get the B+ here. The Giants' pass defense ranks 20th, so expect some play through the air. I'm expecting Cousins really to get it going here. Matt Jones, B-. He looked tough at some times, very few times. He has had some decent runs, but still lacking in the overall output. For every 6-yard gain he has, it feels like the next 4 that come are 1-yard gains. So I'm not expecting a lot of production out of Matt Jones. I am looking at Kirk Cousins, who I gave that B+ to. Wide receiver Deshaun Jackson. I like D-Jax a lot in this matchup, so I'm giving him a B+. He always plays chippy, should get you about 70 yards and a touchdown this weekend. This is a divisional game. Deshaun Jackson is one of those people who takes his rivals very, very seriously. Whether he was in Philadelphia or here with the Redskins, I'm looking for Deshaun Jackson to really make a difference in this game and have his fantasy football owners be paid off. So I'm going to take a little different curve here. Wide receiver Pierre Garçon, C+. One thing I have noticed is Cousins spreads the ball around to his 3 wide receivers, which are all averaging about 60 to 80 yards over 2 games. So my suggestion is start the guy who can break away with that TV, and neither Pierre Garçon or Andre Roberts has proven to be that person. So I am counting on Deshaun Jackson to really put up the big numbers in New York. Tight end Jordan Reed. All right, Reed owners, myself included, we've all been a little frustrated with his production. We've all been a little put down with the area we were having to draft this tight end. You know, his huge year last year, so I gave him the A- because the Giants have that porous defense that is just going to be his cure here. So I'm looking for Deshaun Jackson, Jordan Reed to really throw up some great numbers. Quarterback Eli Manning, I'm going to give the A. As bad as the Giants' pass defense is stat-wise, the Redskins are actually even worse. So Eli Manning, A. All time, everywhere. Go Eli, go, go, go. Running back Rashad Jennings, B-. It appears on the early word that cast is supposed to come off just before the game, but how effective is he going to be? I'm not one to wait till a game time decision to see if his hand or his thumb is going to be good to go. What if he takes the cast off, everything's looking fine, he gets popped one time? He's a running back, he's going to get hit. They're going to be going for that hand. They're going to be going for the ball. So it's just too risky of a start for me as a Jennings owner. I can't put my faith into one play on how he feels coming out of contact. So not worth it for me. I'm going to give him a B-, but I wouldn't start him personally. Running back Shane Vereen, keep your eye on this guy, because if Jennings doesn't go, it's really elevating Vereen up there, and that's one less running back in that Giants offense to have to deal with. So take that with a grain of salt, but keep your eyes open there. Wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr., B+. OBJ gets that B+. I want to give him an A, but his stats aren't quite in the A category just yet. And that's in the TD market, not the yardage. So this could be the game, though. Watch for OBJ to throw up some great numbers. Obviously, always getting those yards, but that touchdown market is a little I don't know what you want to call it. A little shy around OBJ this year. Wide receiver Sterling Shepard, B+. Yep, that's right. I gave him a B+ along with OBJ. Would you believe this guy has a better stat line than Odell Beckham Jr.? Put him in your lineup. If you've been sitting and you don't want to start Shepard, put him in there. His stats are better than OBJ's. Wide receiver Victor Cruz, I'm going to give him a B. He has 125 yards and a touchdown as well. So it's going to be 3 wide on Sunday. Throw any Giants wide receiver you have on your team in your lineup. Tight end Larry Donnell, yeah, he's a C-. They're just, at the end of the day, not enough targets to go around.
Stick around. More matchups coming your way here shortly. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show. You're hearing it on 1350 AM, ESPN Radio. Stick around. You are listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM, ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. You're also maybe finding us on iTunes, Stitcher, any number of places, ESPNDesMoines.com. Andy Hall alongside Brian Eikenberry, currently breaking down each of the fantasy matchups this week, giving grades to each of the fantasy-relevant players. Don't forget the pop quiz is coming up here very soon, and we'll wrap up the show with bargain bin picks and the 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker as well. My next matchup, Cleveland at Miami on the Brown side. Cody Kessler is your starting running back. Give him a C, because who knows with this guy. Miami is a very mediocre pass defense, but aside from relatively quick passes, my guess is the Browns run the ball a lot. And for that reason, Isaiah Crowell is a B+ this week. The benefactor is clearly Crowell. He may end up with 25 total touches or more if things go as planned. Duke Johnson, I'm giving a C grade to. Not seeing the volume requisite of a solid flex play outside of full-point PPR leagues just yet. Corey Coleman, a C+. Breakout game there in week 2, but another new name behind center, and uncertainty abounds. Terrell Pryor gets a C grade, always a threat to score from anywhere on the field. Can Kessler get it to him? Are you willing to risk it? Probably not. Gary Barnidge, a B grade. The uptick in opportunities begins now, is my call. When the Dolphins have the ball, Ryan Tannehill, a B minus. The Browns are pretty bad. One big bright spot, though, is cover corner Joe Hayden, who isn't the best per se, but he's very solid. Tannehill does have multiple weapons on whom he can lean in the passing game. Lord knows the running game likely won't help them. I'm going to leave all the Dolphins runners on the bench. Jay Ajayi, Kenyon Barner, they're all just going to stay there. Jarvis Landry, a B+. He almost always is a great play in PPR. It's only a matter of time before he turns one of those 10-plus receptions into a score. Fingers crossed. Devontae Parker, a C+. A great stash now for your bench. Regardless of his many personality, I guess you'll call him quirks, dude's a first-round talent. Eventually, he will gel with Tannehill, and he will pay off. Trust me on this. Jordan Cameron is a B grade facing his former team. Cameron showed some signs of life in last week's game versus the Patriots. I say he gets one here in a revenge factor game.
Ravens at Jaguars. When I was typing this one up and getting everything kind of compiled, I was like, yawn, yawn, yawn. But then once I really started getting into it, I'm actually kind of excited to actually watch this game. I can't believe it. I just said I want to watch the Ravens Jaguars. Quarterback Joe Flacco, I'm giving him a B. I want to give Flacco that big A here, but his 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions are what's dragging him down. Running back Justin Forsett, B-. Looks like he's going to be going, and he is out-snapping Terrence West 3-1 right now, but he's not doing much with him. But the Jags are giving up 4 yards per carry through 2 games, so this may be his breakout game, especially if he's getting 3-1 on those snaps over West. Wide receiver Mike Wallace, yeah. So I mentioned those 3 touchdowns to Flacco. There's only one person they've gone to, and that is wide receiver Mike Wallace. I've been tooting this horn on these Ravens guys. This is 1 out of the 2 I've been right on. So Mike Wallace, A. Until he proves that he is not the guy to be thrown to in Baltimore, then I'll bring him down off that A. Wide receiver Brashard Perriman, he's the one I'm missing on. Still a little behind. I'm hoping for reputation's sake he gets in the groove. It's just extremely crowded in that wide receiver 2 and 3 positions, so he does suffer a little bit there. Wide receiver Steve Smith, he is actually the number 2 on the depth chart. I'm giving him a B. He proving that age means nothing except that he only has 43 yards per game. So Steve Smith, even though he does make that highlight reel, you're going to have to take that with a little bit of grain of salt. Don't think he's better than what he actually is. Tight end Dennis Pitta, C. Pitta does have 12 receptions, so he may be a PPR flex with his 141 yards so far this season. Under the Jaguar side of the ball, quarterback Blaine Gabbert, B-. The Ravens are giving up, or have given up, mind you, 168.5 yards per game through the air. Not sure what's in the water in Maryland there, but it's working through too. Running back TJ Yeldon, he's getting a C. For someone who had sidelined, or someone who had the whole backfield, he is only 67 yards rushing and 1 TD. So no confidence there on TJ Yeldon. Wide receiver Allen Robinson, B. It's just that tough pass defense seems to be a group of wide receiver combos that's taken the biggest step backwards from last year. So Allen Robinson, B. Hearns is also going to get the B here. Both of these guys have average yardage and no touchdown. Very frustrating depending on where you drafted Hearns, but especially where you drafted Robinson. Wide receiver Marquise Lee, B-. He's only 30 yards actually off Allen Robinson and the same amount of TDs, 0. Tight end Julius Thomas, someone that I've missed on completely this year. He is an A start here. I can't believe it. Julius Thomas, A. The actual leading receiver in my eyes, so that's my fault. But if you look at the stats, it's time to wake up. He's got 135 yards and a touchdown. He has a better score than any of the wide receivers on that roster from a fantasy standpoint.
Next matchup, I'm sure Brian would have loved to have had this one. Detroit at Green Bay. We'll start with the Lions. Matthew Stafford is a B grade. In his last 6 starts versus the Packers since 2013, Stafford has averaged around 250 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. That's a little over 21 fantasy points per contest. At times, he has had a penchant for turning the ball over, but on the whole should be for a halfway decent day here, even at Lambeau. Theo Riddick, I'll give a B grade to. He's fared decently against Green Bay, even scoring a touchdown through the air in December of 2014 at Lambeau. With Abdullah out for the rest of the season, expect a heavy dose of Riddick, mainly through the air, but he should also get a handful of carries, as I mentioned in the headlines, making him more than flex-worthy, especially in PPR leagues. Dwayne Washington is a C grade. Word is it'll be the rookie Washington, not Zach Zenner, who gets the short yardage opportunities for the Lions this weekend and going forward. But wait, there's Joique Bell to consider, who reportedly worked out with the team earlier this week. A situation to keep your eye on. Zach Zenner, I mentioned, I'm leaving him on the bench. Marvin Jones, a B grade. He scored in his lone head-to-head against Green Bay as a member of the Bengals. Seeing a ton of Stafford targets, he's having little trouble finding open space through 2 games. Golden Tate, I'll give a C+2 here. Not seeing as many targets thus far as Jones, but has just as much moxie to his game and has posted respectable, not great numbers in the past versus the Packers. Hasn't scored against them since the replacement refs game of 2014 when he was a member of the Seattle Seahawks. You'll remember that one. Eric Ebron, a B- here. Like the opportunities he's been getting, just hasn't been able to capitalize on much thus far. That could change this week against a Packers secondary that allowed Kyle Rudolph into the end zone last Sunday night. On the Packers side, Aaron Rodgers, a B+. The Lions tend to bring out the best in Rodgers, particularly after a disappointing loss, like the one they sustained in Minneapolis on Sunday night. Look for the Packers passing game to be active early and often in this one. Eddie Lacy, a C+, has never scored a touchdown against the Lions in 5 career games dating back to October of 2013. He might be okay, though, since I'm not sure he could do the Lambeau leap anyhow. Psh. Jordy Nelson, a B grade. Aside from an explosion of output on New Year's Day back in 2012, Jordy scored 3 touchdowns that day and blew by the Lions for 162 receiving yards. Nelson has never posted a stat line aside from that one more impressive than his most recent December of 2014 when he caught 6 passes for 86 yards. Randall Cobb is a B-. Aside from a disastrous 2015, Cobb has posted the bigger numbers of the 2 primary Packers pass catchers, averaging a little over 10 fantasy points per contest. Yeah, not great, I know. Kind of surprising, actually, how inefficient the Packers have been, generally speaking, against the Lions in the recent past. But you got to hang with them. I think you drafted him to be a starter. You're going to plug him into your lineup. Jared Cook, however, I'm leaving on the bench. Just not seeing the scoring opportunities. He's more of a chain-moving kind of guy, at least thus far. Again, a reminder to check us out on anytime on iTunes and Stitcher. We're also online at espndesmoines.com. Like our Facebook page, 515 Fantasy Football, and we're on Twitter at 515 Fantasy. Being real active, especially on Sunday mornings as you're making those tough decisions with your lineups, who to start, who to bench. Maybe you have a trade offer on the table. Maybe you are still mulling over some waiver wire pickups, some guys that are still available there. Brian and I are more than happy to help you out. Make sure to hit us up either on Twitter, 515 Fantasy, or our personal accounts too, at Andy Hall Radio, at Ike FFB. That's IKE-FFB. Also should be reminded that if you are hearing us on iTunes, to rate and review the show. And what this does for us is it helps our visibility. The more ratings and positive reviews we get, the easier it'll be to find our show. Right now, as it is, you can just go to the search and hit 515, and boom, we show up right there. But it sure would help out if you dig our show. Maybe we've helped you out in the past, giving you some good advice that's helped you on your way to victory or a fantasy championship. We love those stories, so feel free to share and feel free to rate and review on iTunes. Brian and I have more matchups still to come, and we also have the world-famous pop quiz segment straight ahead. You'll also get your bargain bin picks in case you're in a pickle. We'll do that to wrap up this week's edition near the end of the program. We also do a little 515 Flea Flicker to end the show as well, where Brian and I talk about a variety of topics in rapid-fire fashion. So looking forward to all of that still to come on this episode. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM ESPN Radio.
Denver at Cincinnati. Quarterback Trevor Siemian. See, he has a locker room, but he also has interceptions, and he also has significant upside. Definitely worth a stash if your bye week is late in the season. I think he's actually going to start to turn things around as the year goes on, but definitely not worth a start. If you're having to start Trevor Siemian, you must have lost a bet. Someone who is, and probably the only surefire bet on the Broncos fantasy football roster, C.J. Anderson. The Bengals have the worst run defense in football. C.J. Anderson is going to get an A. Is there a new CJ2K on the loose this year? Maybe. Wide receiver Demaryius Thomas, he's going to get a B. Quarterback situation is 100% affecting this grade here. You have to start because of who he is and not who is throwing him the ball. So Demaryius Thomas is going to get a B. I'll still take him and put him on my roster somewhere. Wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders, he's getting a C. Definitely not starting him here. He's been MIA since last season, and I don't think he's going to have much luck here either. So that's always a tough little trick there. Jordan Norwood, Virgil Green, same situation, especially Virgil Green being questionable. Quarterback Andy Dalton on the Bengals side of the ball, B-. The number 2 passing offense meets the number 2 passing defense in this matchup. So this should be a good game to watch. I'm kind of excited to click back and forth between a few here. This one's definitely on my watch list. As long as you don't have any fantasy football players in it, this could be a frustrating hair puller right here. It's going to be a tough game to judge, so that's why you're kind of coming to us. Running back Gio Bernard, B-. Split time and a tough defense make either him or Jeremy Hill, who is also getting the B-, a very risky start. Wide receiver A.J. Green, I'm going to give a B here too. I'm kind of being out on this matchup here, it feels like, but there's no surefire bets and there's no surefire losses. So A.J. Green, B. I'm going to give him a good score, but he's going to be with Aqib Talib here, which, funny side note, the Macintosh word program autocorrects Aqib to Squib Talib, so that's kind of sweet. And it's going to be a tough go here for A.J. Green. He's going to get bumped and hit hard at the line of scrimmage, and they're going to put a ton of quick pressure on Andy Dalton, making him throw the ball quick and not giving him down the field shots. Wide receiver Tyler Boyd, he's going to get the C here. I'm not sure what to make of his play this week with the crazy defense, but if there's anyone who I think is going to have a good shot at having the best wide receiver numbers, it is wide receiver Brandon LaFell, who I'm going to give a B to as well. I think LaFell will have the most receiving yards on the Bengals this week, as the defense is going to be paying attention to the running backs and A.J. Green, giving Brandon LaFell, an experienced veteran, the opportunity to score you some fantasy football points.
Minnesota at Carolina for the Vikings. Sam Bradford, a B-. Historically, there's no reason to like Bradford against a Carolina defense that has never allowed him to throw for more than 255 yards in any one game against them. No more than 2 touchdowns either. The Panthers are much more stingy than the banged-up secondary the Vikings saw back in Week 2 against the Packers, and will get after him early and often. Also, really not liking the way the Vikings O-line has been pass protecting, so there's more reason to be skeptical of Bradford this week. Matt Asiata, going to give him a B grade. I like him particularly in standard leagues where he's sure to see action at the very least in the red zone and at the goal line. If you're a PPR kind of person, maybe you'll like Jerick McKinnon better. I'm giving him a B grade as well. He'll get a majority of the backfield touches in the absence of Adrian Peterson, but will his O-line create any holes for him to run through? That is the question. Could have just been a game plan thing, I suppose, last week with the Packers, but Adrian Peterson's had trouble all season long through the first 2 games, and hopefully McKinnon will be able to find some holes. He's a dual threat guy that can also catch passes, which is why he gets an average starting grade this week. Stefan Diggs, I give him a B as well. There's no denying that Diggs is Bradford's favorite target already. Over his first 2 years, Diggs has averaged 14.8 yards per reception and over 65% catch rate and nearly 10 yards per target. You know who else has nearly the exact same stats over that same period? Odell Beckham Jr. I'm not saying he's him, but I'm saying the stats pan out. They're very similar. Kyle Rudolph, I give a C+ too. Won't light up the box score with a huge yardage game, but can and does score touchdowns against these Panthers. The last 2 games these teams went head-to-head, Rudy did reach the end zone. He may get the chance again at another on Sunday afternoon. Over to the Panthers side, Cam Newton is a B- in this one. An excellent stat from Evan Silva at RotoWorld. The Vikings have allowed 17 points or less in 6 straight games. They've faced Russell Wilson, Eli Manning, Marcus Mariota, Jay Cutler, and Aaron Rodgers twice in that span. If it weren't for Newton's rushing ability, I'd probably suggest you leave him on your bench this week, believe it or not. Fozzie Whittaker, a C+. Minnesota has been very good against opposing runners through 2 games, but has given up some production to pass-catching specialists. Whittaker does fit that bill. Granted, he's no DeMarco Murray. Murray's the guy that did the damage back in week 1, you'll remember. Cameron Artis-Payne, I'm leaving on the bench until I see exactly what his role will be. Even when Jonathan Stewart was active, and by the way, he's not going to be this week, but when he was, Fozzie Whittaker was the guy that was getting a lot of field time. So I like Fozzie a little bit this week. Not so much Cameron Artis-Payne just yet. Kelvin Benjamin, giving a B grade to him. Assuming Xavier Rhodes returns to the lineup for the Vikings, Benjamin's 2-game tear should come to a screeching halt here. Don't get me wrong, dude's a monster. He cannot be stopped. I and a lot of other fantasy experts were wrong about Kelvin Benjamin headed into the season, but he should be slowed this week against a tough Vikings defense. Ted Ginn, I'm giving a C grade to. It seems like the Vikings always give up at least one big play per game. If Newton can connect deep, it'll likely be with Ted Ginn Jr. Devin Funchess on the bench, operating at less than 100%. I say keep him out of your lineup. Greg Olsen, a C+. He should be targeted plenty, but the Vikings are actually very good against opposing tight ends.
On to the Los Angeles Rams at Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is probably going to be the quickest matchup in history. Quarterback Case Keenum, B-. Rams are a statistical anomaly. I won't own any of them at this point. They have the 28th worst rushing offense, the 32nd worst passing, the worst in the league, but somehow they managed to beat the Seahawks. No idea. Case Keenum, B-. Running back Todd Gurley, he's going to get the B here. At some point, you have to expect him to go just completely bonkers and break out for a big 150-yard game and a touchdown or two to really reward those owners, getting back to the Gurley that we once seen last year. But I'm not sure it's this week. The Bucs have the 8th-ranked run defense, so that's something you're going to kind of want to pay attention to, especially if they fall behind. Gurley may just be completely absent from this matchup after the second quarter. Wide receiver Kenny Britt, Tavon Austin, Bradley Marquez, Lance Kendricks, all 4 pass catchers for the Rams. I've said it before 100 times over. I will not own a single Ram wide receiver, and neither should you. This is why we have the bargain bin. This is why we do the matchups, so you don't have to start Kenny Britt or Tavon Austin. For grading purposes, through the highly scientific system, Kenny Britt B-, and everybody else is getting a C- on there. The only reason I like Kenny Britt is because he does have that breakaway speed just in case. On to the Bucs side of the ball, quarterback Jameis Winston, B-. I don't like this being his bounce-back game. He threw all those interceptions last week. He really had a rough go. He is at home, so he has that going for him. But I expect another turnover-happy game here as the Rams are 9th best in pass defense. So watch for this matchup. Typically, you're hoping that West Coast team is a little bit jet-lagged or waking up too early for them. But this game's in the afternoon, so that's something you need to consider, and the Rams will be going at full strength on their defense. Running back Doug Martin, as you heard, is likely out for the next 3 weeks. So Charles Sims owners, you got a huge bonus here on Charles Sims, looking like champs, wasting a draft pick on a backup running back, or you just listened to this show and you knew what was coming. So running back Charles Sims, I am actually going to give him a B in this game, and I'm going to give him a B because I think the majority of his action is going to come through the air. He's going to be catching passes in this game. I don't think it's going to be a whole lot of rushing attempts. That Rams defense is just super good, so watch out for Charles Sims. Probably not going to have that big A grade, but I'm expecting a decent one. Wide receiver Mike Evans, he's going to get a B. Coverage is going to roll his way, giving him fits. Jameis is probably going to be under distress, so it's going to be tough to get him good yardage and touchdown. Benson Jackson, C+. I'm still waiting on this guy. I drafted him. I waited those picks. Even though I probably should have cut him at this point, I'm going to be waiting until next week to make that call on Vincent Jackson. He's just not getting the looks, and I think it's not his fault. I think it's more Jameis Winston and being under constant pressure. Tight end Austin Seferian-Jenkins, C-. He and Cameron Brate have nearly identical yardage, except for ASJ has that miracle touchdown he caught over his head and behind the shoulder, so don't count on much for ASJ either.
And again, we invite you to stick around. We've got plenty still to come. We're halfway through the matchup, so more grades on all the fantasy-relevant players and all the rest of them. We've got the bargain bin in case you're in a pinch. We'll give you one quarterback, one running back, and one pass catcher each that you might be able to rely on. And also upcoming, the 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker. A little something Brian introduced a couple of weeks back, where we talk about random topics, not necessarily football related either, in rapid fire fashion. That's how we like to wrap up the show. Invite you to stick around, though. Everybody's favorite segment, the Pop Quiz, is coming up next. This is 515 Fantasy Football on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show, heard on iTunes, Stitcher, online at ESPNDesMoines.com, and on the airwaves at 1350 ESPN Radio in Des Moines, Thursdays from 11 to 1. Andy Hall, Brian Eikenberry, and everybody's favorite, certainly Brian's favorite segment.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite episode.
The Pop Quiz. Yeah, the favorite episode, because they're all your favorite episodes.
Yeah.
3 of fantasy's toughest questions. We throw them at Brian without any research whatsoever. He doesn't know what I'm going to ask. He just answers off the top of his brilliant head.
That's right. And following up on last week's 3 for 3 performance, do it again.
I can almost guarantee you're not going to go 3 for 3 this week, by the way.
Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see.
We begin with question number 1. And Brian, question number 1 is, Sunday's carnage at the running back position included Adrian Peterson, Arian Foster, Jonathan Stewart, Danny Woodhead, Doug Martin, Thomas Rawls, Amir Abdullah, and Rashad Jennings. Which of their backups will prove to be the most valuable by season's end in terms of fantasy scoring?
For me, this one's an easy question. This is Theo Riddick all over it. If you think about how we talked about Riddick before, when he was not a starting running back, he was just catching passes and doing his thing. Now, with Abdullah being on IR, it's all Theo Riddick. And you have to think about his potential to now run and catch passes and be in there for the majority of the game. I think this is the biggest value there is.
All right, let's eliminate Foster, Stewart, Martin, Rawls, and Jennings right off the bat. None of them appear to have long-term or season-ending injuries, okay? So that leaves Peterson, whose backups are Jerick McKinnon and Matt Asiata, Woodhead, who was in a committee with Melvin Gordon, and now, of course, they're dealing with Dexter McCluster there in San Diego as well, and Abdullah, who rotates with several other backs, including Week 1 stud Theo Riddick, whom you mentioned. The shorter of the 3 roads to recovery is not a non-factor here because all 3 are on IR at this point, so you can't narrow it down any further from there. So now we're down to McKinnon, Asiata, Gordon, McCluster, and Riddick, and I don't want you to forget about Dwayne Washington there in Detroit.
Yeah, I think that's a potential, but out of all of those people you just named, you can break it down like this. You can get it down to a 2-person race. You can say Melvin Gordon has the experience of being a starter, and Theo Riddick has experience. So you can eliminate Asiata and McKinnon from that equation. Me personally, you can.
Yeah, though the Vikings running backs, they'll each get plenty of touches in different scenarios. I think the correct answer here is Melvin Gordon. That has virtually no competition. Hey, listen, he's got virtually no competition aside from Dexter McCluster, whom the team just signed, and I don't have a lot of hope in Dexter McCluster anyway. But Gordon has virtually no competition for those touches at the end of the day. I think Melvin Gordon's the answer here, and I say that because I like Theo Riddick, but you also have Dwayne Washington there, and oh, by the way, Joique Bell just worked out for the team.
Yeah, that was cool. I was surprised to see that.
So you're wrong.
No, I'm not. We'll see. We'll take to the Twitter feed, and we'll see who's got my back. There's people.
Not this
There's
week.
People who care.
Not this week, Brian. 0 for 1. On to question number 2. Odell Beckham Jr. is currently 27th in fantasy scoring at the wide receiver position in half PPR leagues. Brandon Marshall is 44th. Allen Robinson is 45th. And Des Bryant, he's 57th. Will any of these consensus preseason top 10 wideouts finish as a wide receiver 1?
Well, I would look and say that OBJ likely has the greater potential because his quarterback and the rest of his team is still the same. I think his production has just been defense is playing him a little different. I think he's going to be the one to play out of it. However, he does have some really good competition with Sterling Shepard and Victor Cruz, so it's probably going to take an injury to really boost his production. But statistically speaking, looking at all the pieces there, I'm going with OBJ.
Yeah, listen, Marshall's already banged up. Robinson's efficiency isn't yet up to par with a top 12 pass catcher. And Bryant, of course, dealing with a rhythm issue with a rookie quarterback. As difficult as it may be through 2 very disappointing weeks, Odell Beckham Jr. will eventually bear fruit in that Giants' potent pass-first Ben McAdoo offense. He's been targeted 19 times through 2 games, an average of over 9 targets per game. He's also been looked at in the red zone, and this is the first time in his career that he's gone consecutive games without 100 yards or a touchdown. That's a staggering statistic.
Yeah, it's incredible. Talked about it in the matchups. It's one of those situations where he's going to be the one to play through it. I'm so glad I didn't draft Dez this year. So glad.
Fair warning, though, it may be another week of tough sledding as the Giants take on Josh Norman and the Redskins coming up in week 3.
That is true.
But you did get that one right, Brian. Question number 2 correct.
Ding, 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 ding.
1 for 2 on the day. And we have one question to go, my friend, and that question is question number 3. Is Coby Fleener outright droppable?
At this point, you have to say yes. He's not learning the playbook. I think it may actually be on deeper than that. If you haven't learned the playbook throughout preseason and now we're going into week 3 of the actual NFL season, it's not happening. I think there are some people under the radar in that tight end slot if you're required to, because what's he got, like 30-some yards? So what are you going to do? Are you going to hold on to it forever and start another 0 in your lineup or a 1 or a 2 point again? I can't. I would have moved on.
Yeah, in all but the deepest of leagues, 14 teams or less, I say he's absolutely droppable. Reports during training camp weren't exactly complimentary, not to mention the fact that in several years in Indianapolis, he was never truly able to separate from Dwayne freaking Allen, who's a very mediocre talent at best at the tight end position. Add that to the fact that Willie Snead is excelling out of the slot in the Saints offense, which is where Fleener would also be running many of his routes. There are plenty of viable tight end options that are performing better and would have come much cheaper on draft day, talking Pitta, Walford, Clay, Cameron, Rudolph, just to name a few. I wouldn't wait any longer. He's taken up a roster spot. Absolutely drop Coby Fleener right now.
Yep, completely agree.
Hey, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, Brian.
Yeah, hey, you know what? That sounds familiar. Isn't that copyrighted in some way, shape, or form?
Oh, too funny. We've still got a lot of matchups to get through. We also, of course, wrap up the show with our bargain bin picks and the Flea Flicker, which is an idea Brian came up with a couple of weeks ago, and we've been running with it. I'm kind of liking this Flea Flicker so far, Brian.
It's fun. I mean, we get to talk about food and jerseys and chips and all taco rice and cheese.
Well, see, now we've covered all of those topics, though. We have to come up with some new ones for this week.
I can talk about food every single week, just so you know.
As long as you're not involving hot dogs in any way, shape, or form, or like tuna, or like salads.
Well, I tell you, that just brought up a flashback. I tried to make a hot dog salad one time, using beef hot dog as like the meat in it. Did not work out, in case anyone's wondering. Do not attempt a beef hot dog salad.
There's so many things, Brian, there are so many things wrong with that sentence, or with that 3-word statement, hot dog salad.
Well, I was making my kid, just some Nathan's hot dogs so he could munch on it with his mac and cheese, and I wanted a salad. I'm like, you know what, I bet this hot dog will be good in here. Nope, ruined the whole thing, and it took a while to get those taste buds back.
We got a couple of minutes here, Brian, before the end of this segment. Before we wrap up the pop quiz segment, I want to go back to question number 1 and our disagreement between the Lions backup running back situation and what I think is the most ideal to have at this point from all the running backs we lost last weekend, and that's Melvin Gordon of the San Diego Chargers. What makes you think that Theo Riddick is going to carry that load when they have several other guys that can do the job?
Well, for me, the knee-jerk reaction really comes down to experience and your proven history. Melvin Gordon does not have history on his side from last year at all in any way, shape, or form. He's doing very well this year. Someone who we talked about last year, Theo Riddick, looks like a champ. We wish they would use him more, but Abdullah was in the way. I genuinely believe Theo Riddick is going to have an opportunity to shine and really, really make those people who heeded our call and snagged him late, just a stash, really going to pay off huge. Especially, look at where he was. Nobody took Theo Riddick in the first 10 rounds, but look how much he's going to pay off now over your draft value.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we've been beating our chest since week one and Theo Riddick's coming out performance. The fact that, typically speaking, I've mentioned it several times, I tend to do the opposite when I'm drafting a team, especially in snake drafts. I tend to load up on pass catchers, receivers, tight ends, even go to the quarterback position before I load up on running backs. I tend to get those later, get guys like Charles Sims, who's in a good spot now, and get guys like Theo Riddick. And Danny Woodhead was in a great position before he got hurt, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And plus, I always like it when we talk about Lions on the show, so
yes,
I'm
of course.
excited about that, too.
Yes, of course. There's plenty more still to come. As I said, we've got lots of matchups yet to break down. If you have any questions, you can always feel free to drop us a line on our Facebook page, 515 Fantasy Football. You can hit us on Twitter at 515 Fantasy. I'm at Andy Hall Radio. He is at Ike FFB. That's IKEFFB. Happy to answer your questions. We'll never ignore you. Invite you to stick around. Plenty still to come on the 515 Fantasy Football Show. And this is 1350 AM, ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. We thank you for checking us out, the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM, ESPN Radio, also on iTunes, on Stitcher, and online at espndesmoines.com. Andy Hall and Brian Eikenberry back at you with more matchups for week number 3. We begin with San Francisco at Seattle. When the Niners have the ball, I don't have a whole lot to talk about. Jeremy Curley is a C grade, barely a starting grade, but since he's the speedy slot guy that should find some open real estate here and there, you could do worse. Vance McDonald, the only other player I'm giving a starting grade to, he gets a B. 65 yards and a touchdown in their matchup with Seattle back in November of last season. McDonald may be the only play you have any excitement over on the Niners side of the ball. Maybe, because it's really not all that exciting. But on the Seahawks side, slightly better. Russell Wilson, a B-. I'm erring on the side of caution again this week following a tough Week 2 loss in Los Angeles. San Francisco historically has played Wilson and the Hawks really close, and whatever high-water mark Wilson may have reached in the recent past gets tossed out when he's at less than 100% and unable to scramble away from pressure. Christine Michael gets a C grade from me. He's done virtually nothing to make me think he's bound to have a breakout one of these weeks. Even with Rawls banked up, the Niners are a good run defense, and Seattle's O-line is still awful. Jermaine Kearse, a B grade. If Baldwin and or Lockett miss time this week, it sounds like they might give it a go, but we'll see. Kearse is the most likely candidate to pick up the slack and take in a ton of targets. Paul Richardson I'm keeping an eye on with a C+ grade, mainly a deep threat. I wouldn't count him out, especially if Baldwin or Lockett or both are out. Again, we're keeping our eye on that, very close eye on that. Jimmy Graham, I'll give a B grade to here. If there was ever a week to take one final chance on this guy before you put a nail in that coffin as a member of your fantasy team, it's this week. Jimmy Graham. I'm half-heartedly endorsing him.
Jets, Chiefs, this is going to be one of those tricky matchups, hoping that the teams play to their potential. Quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's getting a B+. There's one thing that is proven, don't discount Fitz. He's a good quarterback. He's a stable quarterback. He might throw some picks, but he's also going to throw those touchdowns to Decker to make up for it, and even some of those passes to Matt Forte. Speaking of Father Time, Matt Forte, he's getting an A. This game has Forte written all over it. The Chiefs are 30th in run defense, and Forte is proving that the Jets game is a one-man, the Jets run game is a one-man show. Oh, by the way, he has 264 total yards and 3 touchdowns over 2 games. He might double that depending on whether Marshall plays or not. So watch out, Matt Forte, huge game this week against the Chiefs. Yep, I said it. Huge game. Wide receiver Brandon Marshall, B. Questionable, so watch it. Who knows how this is going to go given the new rules with questionable injury. So just keep your eye on it. He rolls, he gets his B. Wide receiver Eric Decker, technically listed as questionable. Statistically, the better wide receiver here. The Jets need all these guys going, so one of them's got to play. So I'm guessing Decker, he's going to get the B+. He has 30 more yards than Marshall does, but also has 2 touchdowns than Marshall's 0. Wide receiver Quincy Enunwa, somebody who popped up on the waiver wire. People got all excited, went out and grabbed him a whole bunch of times. He got a couple of sniffs out there, but it's likely no real threat. to be in your wide receiver start box just yet. Hold on, though. The bye weeks are coming up. On the Chiefs side of the ball, quarterback Alex Smith, C. Surprisingly, the Jets' great pass defense of the past is exactly that, of the past. The Jets are 26th in pass defense, so this may be a homestand. The Chiefs need an Alex Smith to toss up some QB2 numbers. Running back situation, if you watch it, depending on who you're listening to or who you're talking to, Andy Reid says, oh, you just wait till Jamal Charles comes back. And then you look another way, and everyone's like, no, he's sitting. He'll come back in week 4. So either way, Spencer Ware, he's been doing just fine. So Spencer Ware or Jamal Charles, whatever happens, I'm thinking it's going to be Ware. So you Ware owners, you got one more week before Jamal Charles comes back. B. It's a B because Jets are giving up only 71 yards per game at this point in time. So it's risky. That's why they get a B. Wide receiver Jeremy Maclin, B+. Mac Sauce's shot here to snag some touchdowns and some yardage. If there's a week, this is going to be the week Maclin goes bonkers. So start Maclin with confidence if you have him on your roster. Wide receiver Chris Conley, he may be the sneaky play here, but to me, if you're looking at the Chiefs' number 2 or 3 wide receiver, Tyreek Hill, just get out. You need to go straight to the bargain bin and pay attention there if either one of these guys is on your start list. Tight end Travis Kelce, second best receiving option, still without a TD and only 50 yards per game.
San Diego at Indianapolis. Should be a lot of offense in this one. On the Chargers side, Phillip Rivers, a B grade. The Colts are giving up nearly 300 yards per game to opposing passers and an average of 1.5 passing touchdowns per contest. They're extremely banged up right now as well, so I see a slightly above average day for Rivers and his pass catchers. Melvin Gordon, an A grade. You should get the vast majority of the backfield touches here against a Colts defense that has had all kinds of problems slowing opposing runners, projecting a big day following 2 solid performances to begin the 2016-2017 campaign. Not bad for a guy who didn't reach the end zone at all in his rookie season. Travis Benjamin gets a B+. No doubt you've seen what he's capable of in the absence of Keenan Allen. Now with Danny Woodhead also out for the season, expect a decent amount of those vacated targets to go to the speedy Benjamin. Tyrell Williams gets a solid B grade. As expected, stepped up as the number 2 wideout in the Chargers offense, and that'll likely continue this week against a leaky Colts secondary. Antonio Gates gets a B+. Not seeing as many targets as one might expect through the first 2 weeks, but he did get one step closer to surpassing Tony Gonzalez on the all-time tight end touchdown list last week with a score. He should have at least one opportunity in this contest as well. Remember, he needed 8 going into the season. He now needs 7, and it's my contention that he will get almost exactly that number of touchdowns. Funny how that works. Over to the Colts side, Andrew Luck, I'm giving a B+ to. Luck's only other matchup against the Chargers was in San Diego back in October of 2013, and it didn't go well. Look for a bit of redemption here, even if the Colts are missing Dante Moncrief, which they will be. He's missing quite a bit of time. San Diego is ranked 28th against opposing quarterbacks at present, giving up an average of 325 passing yards per game. Frank Gore, I'm giving a C grade to, begrudgingly. I want to bench this guy. At this point, he appears to be nothing more than a possession back. They pulled him at the stripe in favor of Robert Turbin last week. I think Frank Gore's cooked. You might disagree. He is the Highlander, after all. Philip Dorsett. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not it is he or T.Y. Hilton that gets majority coverage from stud cover corner Verrett. Jason Verrett of the Chargers is a stud. I like Dorsett of all the Colts pass catchers in this game. If Moncrief is out, which he is, he'll likely avoid coverage from Verrett. I think Hilton is going to see the majority of that, and Verrett has shut everyone down thus far this season. T.Y. Hilton, for that reason, gets a C+ grade. He probably sees Verrett a lot, which doesn't bode well for his fantasy day. I would temper my expectation if I were you. Dwayne Allen is a B-. I'm not in love with his game, but where there's opportunity, and there is, against these Chargers in the middle of that field, taking the risk may just pay off. We still have more matchups to get to, Brian and I, and we'll wrap up the show as we always do with the bargain bin picks. and the 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker. Again, a reminder, in addition to hearing us on the radio Thursdays between 11 and 1 on 1350 AM ESPN Radio in Des Moines, Iowa, we're also found on iTunes and on Stitcher, both places we appreciate you leaving positive feedback, ratings, reviews. Help us get out there. It's tough, man. We're in flyover country here. So maybe we've helped you out in some way, form, or fashion, or we've made you laugh somehow, Brian and I. We invite you to rate and review our show on iTunes and Stitcher. You can also hear the shows after they're over on ESPNDesMoines.com. We always post the shows there. And we also add a little added production into those versions as well. Some music, bumper music, and whatnot. And you know what else? At that website, we're always adding new ideas for content as well. Every single week, of course, we do the help desk. I try to get those up Monday night, if not Tuesday at the latest, where we give you a number of quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends that chances are available on your waiver wire and you might consider picking up for the week. So content like that, I'm going to get Brian writing a column of his own that we're going to get published on the ESPN Des Moines website. And hoping to get some of my friends over at Sleeper Wire maybe involved as well. The Sleeper Wire guys are fantastic, by the way. They were kind enough to allow me on their podcast this past week on a segment called Fantasy Jeopardy. So to Nick and the guys there at the Sleeper Wire podcast, a big thanks for having me on, and I hope to come on again very, very soon. You can check them out, the Sleeper Wire podcast, also on iTunes and Stitcher. And also, if you're a fan of Sleeper Wire, you probably already know about Sleeper Bot, one of the best apps there is out there, available everywhere, costs you absolutely nothing. They will send you, if you choose, notifications. Many times, you're getting up-to-date news on your favorite teams, players, all fantasy relevant. Not only do they give you the news before the majority of everyone else, they also give you their spin on what they think it means for fantasy as well. And, you know, if you happen to have a player on your team that, say, got injured, you know, they give you a little tips and tricks on how to improve your squad a little bit. So definitely invite you to download the Sleeper Bot app and check out the Sleeper Wire guys. They work really, really hard at what they do, and we appreciate that kind of passion, Brian and I, no question about it. We have one more segment left, if I'm not mistaken, of matchups. We're going to get through those here in just a bit. Again, a reminder, the bargain bin picks are coming up near the end of the episode. Brian and I also have our 515 Flea Flicker segment to wrap up this week's show as well. We do appreciate you listening. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show. You're hearing it as you do every single Thursday from 11 to 1 on 1350 AM ESPN Radio in Des Moines. You are listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM, ESPN Radio in Des Moines, also on iTunes and Stitcher, and online at ESPNDesMoines.com. One more segment of matchups remain, Bargain Bin and the 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker just around the corner, Brian.
Steelers-Eagles. If you showed me this matchup 4 weeks ago, I'd tell you that the Steelers are going to blow the Eagles out. But now, through 2 weeks, who knows what's going to happen as the Eagles are somehow showing up to be a good football team. Quarterback Ben Roethlisberger, B+. Took a few on the old chinny chin last week, but you know what? It's maybe a shot for them to get back on the road, even though the Eagles are a top 5 defense after 2 weeks. I'm not expecting a killer game out of Big Ben, him personally, but he should put up respectable numbers. Running back D'Angelo Williams, B+. One last hurrah to prove he's the man just in case. So don't be that person who goes out next Tuesday and drops D'Angelo Williams if you lucked into him thinking your use is done. After 2 games, he's at 300 yards total offense and 3 touchdowns. We know how Le'Veon Bell is with an injury or even from a little extra partying on a Friday night. So hold on to D'Angelo Williams. Don't be that guy or gal. Wide receiver Antonio Brown, A. I cannot imagine a scenario where Antonio Brown goes for 40 yards again. So I'm thinking 80 and a touchdown is a good way for Antonio Brown to say, I'm back. Hey, sorry that you lost by 1.7 points last week and I threw up a stinker of an Antonio Brown game. Thanks, by the way. That's a real scenario that happened to me. So you can't keep a good man down for long. I truly believe the Eagles' stats are inflated because they played the Bears last week. Terrible, terrible game. Sammy Coates, B-, proving capable to fill in when Antonio Brown is doubled and even tripled. 153 yards over 2 games. It's going to be an interesting toss-up with him and Wheaton operating at full strength. So, let's watch that. Wheaton B, if he does go, he's listed as questionable. But there are too many juicy apples on this tree to pick. Tight end Jesse James, B, bang, bang. There's this guy that, the one Andy Hall said that this was his week, and he did. He did grab a touchdown. He looked like an old Heath Miller. He had that good game last week. Let's see if he can do it on a regular basis going forward. Quarterback Carson Wentz on the Eagles side of the ball, B. Can't yell stud just yet, but he is looking very clean and cut. Good decisions. So I would expect them to pass a lot, especially if they do fall behind. Running back Ryan Matthews, B-. Isn't much in terms of yardage last week. 30 yards, but 2 touchdowns. That surely helped the stat line. Steelers do have that killer front that's going to hurt the run game. So I do think Sproles is actually going to have the better game out of the 2 running backs. So Sproles is B. Jordan Matthews, B. 185 and 1 through 2 games, and he has 14 yards per catch. So he's looking good. Jordan Matthews, B. Dorial Green Beckham, B-. Nelson Aguilar here, B. Risky start, but has a bad pass defense. Matthews has 100 yards on it, but he could be a sneaky little play here. Tight end Zach Ertz, just not there yet, so there is no other tight end of value on the Eagles roster.
Chicago at Dallas. When the Bears have the ball, it's all Brian Hoyer. He gets a C+. Historically, Jay Cutler has fared well against the Cowboys no matter where the game is being played. Trouble is, Brian Hoyer is starting for the foreseeable future. But because he's got a few weapons with which to work, I don't hate his chances here, but I'm not running to the waiver wire to grab him and plug him right in either. Nor should you. Jeremy Langford gets a B- in this matchup. Dallas is giving up nearly 5 yards per carry through 2 games, and if the Bears want to keep this one close, they'll need to play ball control. Langford is the only one of the Bears runners I'd consider in your starting lineup this week, despite the fact that we've been seeing more of Kadeem Carey and the rookie Jordan Howard in recent weeks. Alshon Jeffrey, a B+ in 2 previous home games against the Cowboys. Jeffrey has posted an average of 90 receiving yards and a score. In one game at Dallas back in 2012, he only caught 3 balls for 32 yards. Worth noting that Jeffrey wasn't the receiver he is back in 2012. Should see a ton of targets from Hoyer here and a good opportunity for some red zone looks if the Bears can get it there. That's a big if. Eddie Royal gets a B-. He's seen 6 targets in each of his first 2 games this season, hauled in 4 passes for 55-ish yards in both, scored on a receiving touchdown in week 1 and on a punt return in week 2. I don't hate him as a flex play, especially with Hoyer under center, but only in the most dire of circumstances. Zach Miller is the tight end, a B-. Should get a little more involved now that Hoyer's on the field. It seems to be the case anytime you plug a new guy in there. And Brian is a bit of a veteran. He's a journeyman, but and he knows his stuff, but I think he'll still lean on the tight end a little more than Jay Cutler would have. Over to the Cowboys. Dak Prescott, a B-grade start. This should be a run-heavy game for the Cowboys, who, of course, will always pass the ball. But my gut tells me they really want to get Elliott going in this one, as he's been off to a slow start. And the Bears have not been very good against opposing runners. Speaking of Zeke, an A-grade. I'm calling it. This will be Zeke's breakout game. Expect a very heavy dose. Plug him in. Play him with confidence this week. Alfred Morris, a C+. He should garner flex consideration as a change of pace and to give Elliott a breather after all those long runs that he's sure to break off this week. Des Bryant is a B grade, never posted monster numbers against the monsters of the Midway. The Bears aren't nearly as bad against the pass as you may think they are. They ranked 4th last season. They're currently 5th. Cole Beasley, a C+. I'm a big fan of him in PPR leagues. He's better than a C+ start there. Scored 2 touchdowns against the Bears in 2014 and 1 back in 2013. Volume of plenty. You got to love that in the PPRs. Jason Witten, a B-. He still has the eye of Prescott. He should see a decent amount of targets here.
On to the Falcons and the Saints. Quarterback Matt Ryan. Big old A here. Matt Ryan is getting that A for some reason. I truly want and think this is going to be that big breakout game. It feels like I've been saying that with the Saints or the Falcons over the last 2 weeks. I think this is it. This has to be that big offensive showing here. So Saints are 30th ranked pass defense. Falcons are the number 1 ranked passing offense. So let's do this. Running back Devonta Freeman, Tevin Coleman, both B minuses. No confidence in these starts. If you have other options, use them. My public service announcement is that is a risk and a gamble. I know your heart's hurting. I know you're sad you drafted him in the first or the second round. This is now a full-time split, as proven by the last 2 weeks of production and the head coach telling you this is a split. Wide receiver Julio Jones, B+. Julio's going to have his day as long as that undisclosed injury is not a factor the next few days. 172-2 after 2 games. Wide receiver Mohamed Sanu, B. Sanu had a setback last week statistically, but hopefully the Saints are just that remedy that he needs. He was pretty much near non-existent, so I'm hoping Sanu can pick up his game here this week. Has to. This has to be the week. Tight end Jacob Tamme. Tamme has been a trip. He's averaging 11 yards per catch and has a touchdown grab, and he actually has better stats than Sanu does currently, so Jacob Tamme's going to get a B-. Quarterback Drew Brees, he's getting an A, obvious A start here with his weapons and his aggressive need to push the ball, and at home also coming off a dismal touchdown performance last week. So they're going to want to score all the way home. Running back Mark Ingram, B+. Falcons have the 26th worst run defense, which is going to pair nicely with Ingram's run style and his pass catching prowess. So he's going to get those fantasy owners that boost in points that they've been waiting all year for. Wide receiver Brandon Cooks, B+. Cooks is great, no argument. He has a beefy 16.2 yards per catch, including his gangbuster 98-yarder that was a touchdown. But why the B+? Because I'm saving my other A for Willie Snead. Snead is sneaky fast, sneaky good, and he really gets after the ball. I've been watching his highlights. He just catches the ball. He lays out. He goes through traffic. Whatever he needs to do, he jumps, he dives. He makes every single effort to catch that ball, and I think Drew Brees recognizes that and is always willing to take a risk to Willie Snead. He has 226 yards and 2 touchdowns over 2 weeks and is averaging 16.1 yards per catch. Wide receiver Michael Thomas, B. He has 10 receptions, but is often the third progression, and typically the ball's already out of Brees' hands. If he is scrambling, it's usually going to go to Mark Ingram or Colby Fleener. Colby Fleener, no thanks, 35 yards after 2 games.
All right, that should just about do it for the matchups. We've made our way through that, and now it's about time to get ready for the bargain bin picks and the 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker. Again, a reminder, bargain bin, in case you're hurting at a quarterback, at a running back, or at a receiver-type position, whether that's wide receiver or tight end. Brian and I have each picked one from each of those positions that chances are available on your waiver wire. Many of the percentages are 50% or better that they're available. You can go grab them right now, plug them right into your lineup this week, and expect a decent amount of fantasy production from. A little better than a dart throw because, Brian and I actually do a little research, too, with these bargain bin picks. And, more often than not, I think they pan out halfway decently. Certainly could be worse for you, couldn't it? Also, the 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker is a new idea from Brian himself. He introduced it a couple of weeks ago, an opportunity to spread out, talk about some things other than fantasy football, because we do have interests outside of this, believe it or not. But this time of year, this tends to be about 99.9% of it. My wife can tell you that, no question about it. So we invite you to stick around for both of those things before we wrap up this show. And again, we remind you we're on Facebook at 515 Fantasy Football, on Twitter at 515 Fantasy. I'm at Andy Hall Radio. Brian is at Ike FFB. That's IKEFFB. Feel free to reach out. We love to interact with our listeners. Love to hear your success stories. If you have start-sit questions, maybe you have a trade offer on the table, want to get our 2 cents on it before you pull the trigger, definitely feel free to reach out, either via the Facebook page or the Twitters. The Twitters. Stick around. Our final segment of this week's show is coming up here shortly. You are listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM. ESPN Radio. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show, heard Thursdays from 11 to 1 on 1350 AM, ESPN Radio in Des Moines. You can also, of course, find us on iTunes and Stitcher and online at espndesmoines.com. Andy Hall back with Brian Eikenberry and a segment we call the Bargain Bin. This is if you're in big trouble due to injury, due to the latest that just came down on Josh Gordon. Have you heard about this yet, Brian?
Yeah, this is incredible. Now he's got a paternity suit and a warrant out for his arrest. Jeez, what's next? Failure to pay parking tickets?
Guy just can't stay out of trouble, apparently. I'm not freaking out just yet. We'll wait and see what the NFL wants to do here. But, of course, he's in the midst of his 4-game suspension to start the season. So fingers crossed that Josh Gordon can finally get his you-know-what straightened out. There's any number of reasons why you might need a dart throw week after week in your starting lineup, whether it's a quarterback, whether it's a running back, or maybe it's a pass catcher, a receiver, or a tight end. Brian and I have this bargain bin segment where we give you one of each of those and give you a great reason as to why you can plug that player right in. Chances are he's on your waiver wire now, and you can expect some decent fantasy production from. Who's your quarterback this week, Brian?
My quarterback this week is Carson Wentz. I talked about it in the matchups. Look, this guy's a young rookie. He's not making mistakes, and he's playing the Steelers' defense. They're going to put pressure on. Big Ben's going to be tossing the ball. They're going to be playing from behind. He'll probably throw an interception, but he's also probably going to have 3 touchdowns. So I believe in Carson Wentz this week as my bargain bin.
My quarterback is Joe Flacco. He improved upon his Week 1 stinker against the Browns last week and gets an equally terrible Jaguars defense here in Week 3 that just gave up 220 yards and 4 passing touchdowns to Phillip Rivers. Eliminate the turnovers, and a big day could be in store for Joe Flacco. Who's your running back?
My running back this week, so you're going to have to bear with me here, it's just going to be a little knuckle biter here, is running back Shane Vereen. The reason is because I'm fearful of Rashad Jennings. With that cast coming off, if he takes a hit on it wrong, he's going to be out the door. So you need to think about Shane Vereen as a stash. Not an immediate start this week, but as a stash, because you never know. If he re-injures that thumb, something goes awry, you're sitting there with a new starting running back.
Yeah, that's an injury that I don't think most coaches want to take a risk on, and for that reason, I don't think Rashad Jennings is a definite this week, is he?
It's up in the air right now. They say the cast is going to come off Sunday morning, and they're going to give it a go.
Oof.
But that's scary.
Yeah, Shane,
I'd be fearful, especially at running back.
I'm supposed to be the guy that picks Shane Vereen. I always pick Shane Vereen.
I know, right? I'm feeling all weird. Now I got to shave my head bald.
No, here's what's going to happen, because Shane Vereen very rarely pans out when I do pick him as a bargain bin. So this time he's going to have a huge game. You watch. My running back, and I'm pretty sure my running back will have a good week this week. Isaiah Crowell, Cleveland Browns. We saw Crowell bust off an 85-yard touchdown run against the Ravens in Week 2. This week, he gets the Dolphins, who were torched by LeGarrette Blount for 123 yards and a touchdown last week. If LeGarrette Blount and Isaiah Crowell were put next to each other, I'm not sure I could tell them apart.
Not a bad pick at all.
Now, how about your pass catcher?
So my pass catcher, I'm going true pass catcher, wide receiver Marquise Lee, Jacksonville Jaguars. Talked about in the matchup. We talked about it during the pop quiz. Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns, they're really regressing. Somebody who's there, Marquise Lee, as I said before, he's only 30 yards off of Allen Robinson. So while they're dealing with the Ravens secondary and one of the top-ranked pass defense, the top-ranked pass defense, I'm giving hat to Marquise Lee here. I think he's going to go under the radar and have a good game this week.
I cannot believe how many places Travis Benjamin is still available. If he's available in your league, grab him. He's my bargain bin wide receiver. Week 2 was a sign of things to come, considering all the vacated targets in that Chargers offense with Keenan Allen and now Danny Woodhead out for the season with season-ending injuries. Oh, by the way, he gets to face the Colts this week. They're awful.
Jackpot.
No doubt. So we have about 6 minutes and change here before we have to wrap up the show, Brian. The 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker is an idea you came up with a couple of weeks ago, and it's just an opportunity for us to stretch out, talk about some other things at random and rapid-fire fashion.
Yeah, I absolutely love doing this. It came from a little frustration, as we always had more things I wanted to talk about before the show was over. So here we go. My first Flea Flicker today is trading etiquette. we often talk about trading and, hey, you need to grab this guy. But my trading etiquette comes from when you send somebody a trade, they either want to be the clear winners in the trade and have to have the best deal and screw you over, or somebody won't just give you a counter. If someone says, hey, I got this guy, he's up for trade, hey, I'll give you X and Y for Z. Nope. Well, come back at me a little bit. Counter offer. If it's a reasonable trade, you just don't like the players, counter offer. That's how business works. That's how trading works. Just give me a counter instead of just hitting no and then going about your business. You're the one who wants to trade the player.
There's a guy in our league that we share together, the one you commish. I sent a trade offer out to him. He's the Doug Martin owner, and he's 0-2. I've got Charles Sims on my roster, so I tried to send him Charles Sims, and I asked for Aaron Rodgers. He wasn't going for that.
No surprise.
I mean, why not, though? I mean, he's already got Matt Ryan on his roster. Why, is that a terrible trade?
Well, statistically speaking, no, because Matt Ryan is a pretty dang good quarterback this year, and you clearly need a running back.
He does. And so, I tried to offer him, Martin's handcuff, and he immediately rejected it. So, and I got nothing else from him. So I don't know if he's offended or what, but yeah, trading. You know what I want to talk about today in the Flea Flicker?
Baked potatoes.
Well, that would be a good subject to talk about. No question. I want to talk about my most hated foods.
Your most hated foods?
Yeah,
inevitably.
Well, eggplant's not nearly as bad as like tuna.
See, here we go. I love tuna.
Anything
tuna
that, I'm telling
delicious.
you, no. Anything that smells like an unkempt human being does not go in my mouth. Forget it. It's just gross.
So a person I used to work with, one of her old comfort foods, she's an old goat, but one of her old comfort foods was a thing called tuna gravy.
Oh, gross.
And it was served on biscuits, kind of like chipped beef on toast, but it was tuna gravy. It was like a yellowish white gravy with tuna in it over biscuits. And that's what that's gross and terrible.
Dude,
but tuna gravy.
I'm dry
made
heaving.
Your day, didn't it?
I'm dry heaving right now. Now I don't want to talk about food anymore. I want to talk about anything else. Do you have anything else in mind?
Just a trade thing. I've really been stuck on that as of late, trying to farm out some of my do the opposite. So if you were ever a doubter of do the opposite, this is a perfect example of why sometimes you do the opposite. In a league where I took 5 straight pass catchers, all of mine escaped injury, and I'm sitting in a pretty good spot where I can start to sell off my wide receivers to other teams who have season-ending wide receiver issues. So it's a good spot to be in. Think about this, folks. You might think we were crazy. Do the opposite. It's paying off for a lot of people this year.
Otherwise known as zero running back, but do the opposite was the original purveyor of this idea is Paul Charchian, former fanball guy, and I'm a direct disciple of Mr. Charchian. I'm a big fan of his and everything about him. So yeah, I've been doing the opposite for a very long time. And while I'm throwing props out, Brian, I want to say thanks to the Sleeper Wire guys for having me on their podcast this last week. I was on a segment called Fantasy Jeopardy. If you're on iTunes or Stitcher, you can search Sleeper Wire and get their podcast and take a listen. It was a lot of fun with Nick and the guys. And while I'm at it, also handing out props to the Sleeper Bot app, which is the best app I own.
Yeah, Sleeper Bot has absolutely changed my lineup, my strategies, and even some early trading. If you get breaking news on your phone, you can sneakily send in a trade request to other people before they even know the breaking news. So listeners, if you're out there, download Sleeper Bot for your phone, get it, prepare yourself, and take advantage of somebody who doesn't have it.
Speaking of sneaky, did you notice my sneaky pickup this morning on the waivers?
No, I was not paying too much attention.
Yeah, apparently
I don't have to watch that stuff.
Apparently the rest
position with nothing but studs.
The rest of the league was sleeping too because I just picked up Tyler Iford off waivers.
Oh, that's right. He's loosening up, looking limber, getting ready to come back, isn't he?
He's returned to practice now on a limited basis, but we are expecting him back in game action within a week or two here. So now is a good time. He was sitting on the waiver wire. I couldn't believe it. So I grabbed him and I dropped Dak Prescott. I don't need a backup quarterback just yet. So.
Well, I'm holding tight with 0 transactions heading into week 3. I'm probably going to make it, excluding my 3 for my bye weeks, I got a pretty good feeling about this year. I'm going to be low man for transactions. I'm going to be proud.
That'll do it for this week's episode of the 515 Fantasy Football Show. Again, find us on Facebook, 515 Fantasy Football. We're on Twitter at 515 Fantasy, at Andy Hall Radio, at Ike FFB. That's IKEFFB. Brian, anything to add real quick before we wrap up?
Hopefully, may your roster and odds be ever in your favor. How's that?
Little Hunger Games reference there. We thank you so much for listening. We hope you'll catch us again next week. The replay on iTunes, Stitcher, and online at ESPNDesMoines.com. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show. Have a good one.